When Gen created the planet it named Vol-Tana, the surface was just like that of Earth. The oceans lapped and crashed against sand and rock, as they should, but history has a way of spiraling in unintended directions, and after Gen abandoned its creation, the magic it left behind would eventually lead to the lifting of the continents and the formation of a worldwide ocean. But before going further, time for some messages from me. I want to write stories in this world, and so explaining all the lore behind it will create a lot of spoilers, especially since I want my novels to take place in several different ages of history. They'll only be loosely connected through the world itself and its mysterious creator, of course, so they'll very much be standalones for all purposes. So that's all to say, spoiler warning, for things that haven't been written yet and probably won't be for a while. But that's that. Me and this universe have something of a history. It's my little baby, my child that I've been toiling over on and off for the better part of a decade. So, if I geek out a little over it and get carried away in future videos, that's why. In fact, you should probably expect that, if I'm being honest. Funnily enough, the first inspiration I got for this world was around 9 years ago, when I was a wee little middle schooler looking at Google images of floating islands in Minecraft. And I guess it's only fitting that I ended up showcasing it through Minecraft. So there's that. I had been playing my hand at writing for several years before then. I tried writing my first book when I was around 8 or 9. But this world is the first one that I have kept through the years, building and morphing it to the point where it is today. My first forever project, you could say, for even after all these years, it is far, far from complete. And it never will be, I suspect. That's the whole point of forever. And for 9 years of work, there is surprisingly little I actually have concretely completed, but don't you worry, it's still a lot. High school took a lot of my time, and college even more so. There were whole years where I barely thought of Vol-Tana, and when I would revisit it, I would make such sweeping changes that it looked almost unrecognizable, other than the core idea of floating islands. The history is what's probably changed the most. It has very much been a playground for trying to get a bunch of cool events to make sense in a cohesive world. But the mythology has also evolved drastically. It began with an almost Mayanite system of gods. If any of y'all saw that series way back in the day, shout out Captain Sparkles. So there was a good god, an evil god, and a semi-neutral god. That faded away pretty quickly, because then a creator god came into the picture, which I named Gen. You can see that they stuck around. And the other gods were eventually erased and evolved into things entirely different. There were even angels and demons at one point, but that idea has long flown away. Now, I don't even know how I would describe the mythology without explaining it all in painful detail, but worry not, for I do want to make a video for that at some point. The first name I gave to this world was The Above. I bet you'll never guess why. Then I switched to the arguably worse name of Terria, as if it couldn't get any more Latin. There might have been another name I've forgotten since, but for the past 5 or so years it's been Vol-Tana. And instead of just sounding cool, it actually has meaning. It comes from the language of Gen the Creator, called Uluscri, and means perfect planet. The shape of the world has taken many looks as well. If there's anything I love drawing, it's maps. One of the first things I made of Vol-Tana was a map. I believe I made it around 2014, and this is what it looks like. It's very rough, but, you know, they slowly got better. There were a couple more iterations until I got the general shape it is in now, around 5 or 6 years ago. Then I made the jump to digital with all its useful layers to play around with, and this is the most up-to-date version. As you might be able to tell, the world is an extremely vague image of Earth with its 2 general continental regions, and that is not a coincidence. The reasoning involves telling Gen's background as an alien fleeing a galactic war, but as with many other things, that is for another video. Gen being a celestial creature of extreme power and shifting form is all that is relevant for painting a general picture of this planet. Their magic is purely creationary. They can create any form of matter or energy they so please, but are unable to destroy anything. This was an issue in the war that they fled from, but once they settled in a quiet galaxy far from danger, they set to forming a star called Do-Am, or Good Star. Then a clutch of 5 planets to orbit it. I'm just going to list them from closest to farthest from Do-Am, and their names provide some info on what they were like. If you notice any of the oddities of these worlds, then you may find it interesting to note that these places were the playground of a celestial entity. The first is Vol-Hogat, or Hot Planet. Not especially creative there. So moving on is Vol-Tana, the Perfect Planet, as I've already said. I made the continents a little close together in this rendition, but in my defense, it's difficult to copy an originally flat map onto a globe, so that's how you get that. I do want to make a larger version in the future that has a bit better scaling, but that's what we got for now. Then there's Volkirna, or Poison Planet. Not a good place to live, I'd say. You can probably guess that. Then there's Vol-Loth, or Storm Planet. Also not a fun place to live. And finally, the largest terrestrial planet you may ever lay your eyes on, Volprith, or Cold Planet. I should note that these orbital distances and relative sizes are not to scale, but still, Vol-Loth is about the size of Jupiter, if that gives you any indication as to how huge Volprith is. Back to Gen now. As its last task, it's set to nurturing life on one of these planets. It was a long process that took thousands of years of work, but the creator had already spent thousands before creating the system itself. It made all sorts of Earth-like life, plants, bacteria, fungi, and animals. It even brought back some species extinct today, like giant mammals from the Ice Age, great winged pterosaurs, and some dinosaurs. But of course, last to be formed were humans. And thus did Gen cease its creating, moving onwards to raising humanity to being a thriving civilization. All people were united into one nation under Gen, known as Fal-Gothil-An, or the Great Everlasting State. Grand cities were built that rivaled those of our modern world in sheer size. Conflict, though not unheard of, was practically non-existent beyond a certain scale. People lived with food in their stomachs and joy in their hearts for all their lives, from one corner of the state to the other. There were a few breakaway peoples who rejected the protection of Gen, but those were few and tended not to last long out in the wilds. As of this point in history, there was no magic except what Gen themselves did. All that was accomplished was through technology alone. So was the state of the world when Gen suddenly left under mysterious circumstances, never to return. You know, that's all fine and dandy, but how'd everything get around to floating in the sky? Well, to explain that in full would require a probably 30-minute discussion of Vol-Tana history, and you may have noticed that this video isn't that long, so the short story is that around 67,000 years after Gen left, magic was born, and as it tends to do, complicated everything. All it took was a mad soul with too much power to convince himself that raising the land would bring the people closer to the heavens, and thus to divinity. You know, obviously it didn't work, but he wasn't about to lower the islands back down at that point, so. Thus is how we get the world we see today. Past this point is around 10,000 more years of history. Gods will be born and wage wars against each other that send huge islands crashing into the worldwide ocean below. A magical empire will rise, fall, then rise again. The greatest city ever known will, for lack of a better word, explode. If you haven't noticed yet, I am kind of obsessed with history as a general topic, and it's by far the most developed part of this world. So then, back to the island for a general overview. One thing to keep in mind is that this is very much a quick mock-up. I built this in around 4 hours, I'd say, so there's a lot that could be improved. Like, for instance, I just sort of threw those trees there, and I definitely could have done a better on that one cherry tree that I tried to build. And then a lot of the island is also just kind of empty, but, you know. Anyways, this is what the islands look like, for the most part. They are comprised of a semi-normal surface. The altitude can make things a bit foggy, and the weather a bit wonky. A semi-normal underground. There are certainly oddities down there as well. And a very unnormal bottom. These green crystals are the magical anchors that hold all the islands up. And they're normally not so large relative to their islands, I just think this rendition looks cool for a smaller island. The tops of most continents are around half a mile above the ocean, but this varies somewhat. That means that mountains get snowy and low on oxygen way quicker, even if the people adapted to the higher altitude over time. As I hinted at before, this leads to some interesting weather effects. But admittedly, I do still need to figure those out, so more on that later. The middle section was not terribly tall, being around 1/6 of a mile thick on average and 1/4 mile at the thickest. This meant that if one dug too deep, which was wont to happen, they could literally fall through the island and into the certain death of the ocean below. So that's fun. Most mines didn't need to go that deep, though. Thankfully for them. Also, the edges are not this clean normally. The being that lifted the land was not terribly careful, so as you may be able to tell from the map, a lot of the edges are quite jagged, and stuff just naturally falls away due to erosion and imperfect crystal placement. But I think that's enough for now. If any of this interests you, then consider subscribing. They may not come out especially quickly, but expect many videos on Vol-Tana in the future, and in other universes as well. I have a more down-to-earth world that I do want to make some buildings in, and that I will want to showcase, so look forward to that as well. I'm thinking of making it a very medieval style, because I've been doing a good bit of research on that time period recently. But anyways, thanks for watching all the way through. I know a lot of information was just thrown at you, so feel free to ask questions in the comments below or make suggestions for what you would like to see covered in future videos. I'm thinking the next video should hopefully take no more than a couple of weeks to make, fingers crossed. I should be a little less busy than I have been over the holidays, so it should at least take a shorter amount of time than it took this video to come out. Fingers crossed. And that is all. Farewell and safe travels.